At this time, we will reconvene our budget workshop and need a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
And a second. All those in favor, raise your right hand. Okay. For your information, Randy says he's got to leave at 6. A few other housekeeping items. I will not be here when we have the expansion discussion, and so Vice Chair Langley will serve there. And the day, June the 1st, my flight coming back in is going to make it almost impossible for me to be here at 5. And if you would change that to 7, I would appreciate it. That's on June the 1st. It's not a regular commissioners meeting. It's our
So moved.
kind of wrap up budget. Okay, all those in favor? Thank you very much for accommodating. Turn it over to you, Brian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Just a couple of follow-ups from the last meeting. There are 3 pieces of paper that I've added to your desk. The first one looks like this, that has the 2 boxes in it. One says North Carolina Local Government Employee Retirement System. Commissioner Rebholz asked about what the rates were and how they had changed. And you'll see these are the rates. There is under the retirement system, the contribution by the employer. There's both an employee contribution and an employer contribution. And you'll see the employer contribution, which is what the state treasurer controls and has the ability to change. The employee contribution is in statute and would take an act of the General Assembly to change, and that's 6%. So you see the difference. July 1 of 2020, there is a non-law enforcement base rate, and then there is a law enforcement base rate. So it's a little higher on the law enforcement. But the change from last fiscal year to project for this new fiscal year is a 1.2% increase. We roughly have about a $17 million payroll, so that equates to a little over $200,000. And then the second piece is the North Carolina State Plan, of which the county is a member. Their plan actually went down this year. It went down by a total of $124.80 per year. So you see the effective dates on that, January 1 of 2020, the premium for the year for employee-only coverage, which is what the county provides, and then what it was this January 1 on 2021. The difference between the two, and I don't know why they don't get them on the same fiscal year, but the retirement system works on the fiscal year. So July 1 it changes, it runs from July 1 to June 30th. The health plan runs on the calendar year, so January 1 to December 31. So the challenge that we have is we could get caught in the middle of a rate change because our budget runs on the fiscal year and they run on the calendar year. So what we know on July 1 may change come January 1. But that is that information. The second piece of information is a letter from the Department of Revenue, and that was what we talked about a little bit about where our sales ratios were and what the state requires when the sales ratios drop to a certain level and how it impacts public service, public utility valuation. And Tax Assessor Lloyd Salter's here tonight, and he'll talk to you just a few minutes about that before we get kicked off. And then you have the other sheet, which is the Sheriff's Office salary adjustments that was requested. There was a list of requests from Commissioner Richardson. Of course, we sent out a note, Chief Deputy Rose asked, we sent out a note to the board to ask him, was there anything particular that they might need so that he could be prepared to present it to them. Commissioner Richardson had a list. Chief Rose took the first 4 or 5, and I had the last one because it's a personnel piece. So you have that for when the Sheriff's Office is there. And then Elena Cameron, who is Executive Director of BCDC, is here tonight for the start of the meeting because there were a couple of questions that were asked that I couldn't answer at the last meeting about BCDC and bats. They operate bats. So she's here tonight to answer any of those quick questions you may have. So Elena, thanks for being here.
You're welcome, Brian. Good evening, Chairman and Commissioners. I understand y'all have some questions, or would you like for me to do an overview of our program?
I think Commissioner Richardson had at least one question.
Yes, sir.
Well, I mean, what we were talking about revenues. Do you collect a fee from passengers personally who ride your system?
Yes, sir.
Okay, how do you go, what is your schedule? How do you go about doing that?
We have our fee schedule that is posted up on our website. It depends on the location. Every passenger has to depart from Beaufort County. We cannot pick up a passenger in another county and take them somewhere. So if it's an out-of-pocket fee, it depends if they're doing Washington or Chocowinity or Bath, Old Ford, and to where they're going and what the total cost is.
About how much revenue did you take in last year from this?
From just the out-of-pocket, well, last year was kind of skewed because of COVID, but the majority of our revenues come in from our non-medical transportation that we do with different entities. Now, for the out-of-pocket fees, that's considered just rural general passenger, and that can be for if someone needs to go to the store or they would like to go to the senior center and there's no funding through that, or if they wanted to go for a swim when the pool was open, or go to the drugstore if they, and some have employment that may not have employment funding. So just for example, if we had someone who was originating out of the Bath Old Ford area and they wanted to go to Chocowinity, it would be $15. If they wanted to go to Greenville, it'd be $25. But if we've got a lot of passengers that need to go to Durham or Chapel Hill, it could be up to $155. Because we may have to leave a driver up there and wait.
That's cash out of pocket.
This is some cash out of pocket.
That they would pay?
Yes, sir.
All right, about how much in dollars did you collect in revenue last year or year before?
I would probably say probably about 35, 40,000.
Okay, can you get those numbers and email them to the clerk
I
and
would
let her
love to.
email them to us?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And then it will be skewed because our numbers plummeted a lot last year because of COVID. We had a significant decrease in ridership.
But the majority of your business comes from agencies that pay for picking up and delivering patients.
It could be, we have our non-medical transportation that can be a Medicaid recipient. We currently receive those referrals from DSS. Starting July 1, we will be working with 2 state brokers that is going to start pulling that away from DSS. Also, we're doing funding from the Cancer Center, and we do a lot of dialysis runs, so that's 2 to 3 times a week to and from, and we start, someone comes in at 1:30 in the morning to get prepared to be on the road at 2:30, and then we have 3 o'clock and 3:30 runs.
So you wait for the patients when you deliver them to dialysis?
Not necessarily. That is only if they're in Greenville, Chapel Hill, Durham. We had someone in Pamlico County today. If it's not, if it's more cost effective and just by how the routes line up, we may have someone that has to sit there. Yes, sir. If it's someone in town, then we'll go and they'll do a drop-off, and then the patient calls or someone from their office calls and says they're ready for pickup, and we dispatch to have someone go get them.
Do you have an hourly charge for wait?
No, we don't charge for waiting.
You just charge the transportation, so you eat the waiting charge time? Okay.
There used to be, we did used to have a charge for wait, but we're not able to do that anymore. So we do eat.
Is that because the state is telling that you're really a transportation organization and not a service organization?
Not necessarily. It's just that when you do a transport, like some of the problems that we have is we may dispatch a vehicle down to Belhaven and take someone for a mile down the road, and then we have to sit and wait because it's not cost effective to bring the vehicle back to Washington or going to the Bath area. So we absorb those costs. Yes, sir.
Several years ago, you tried routes, pick up downtown, deliver to community college, do some other things. That really didn't work out, did it?
It didn't have a demand, no, sir. We are We do transport individuals to the community college, and if people call and they want to, say, go to the grocery store or go to Walmart, we will provide that service, but that's, everything is by fee for service.
How many transportation units do you have now?
We have 12 in the fleet, and we were able to, during COVID, we were able to purchase 2 minivans. They're black. We got 2 2019s for like $3,500 from another fleet in Greensboro, so we purchased them to assist with our COVID transportation, especially for those long trips, because due to the length of the vehicle, we were able to carry one. Because of COVID, we're restricted on how many people we can transport, even with the barriers that we put up and the purification system that we installed that kills everything on contact. We still are under COVID regulations, we'll continue to do that.
About what percentage of your revenue do you get as a grant from the state Department of Transportation?
So for, based on what we have received in regard to our local share certification for funding, and this is basically what is requirement for us to continue to receive our funding in the local share, we're currently at what is required for local share, $211,506. We're receiving and have received from the county the past few years $193,750. And that's the
per
requirement.
year?
Per year.
Per year?
Yes, sir.
Well, how much do you get from the state?
You're talking about DOT?
Yeah.
That is with $636,136.
So we're funding a third.
Due to the continued requirements and with changes with DOT as it continues to change almost every year. Several years ago, we had to go and bring in another administrative assistant due to the NC Tracks billing requirement. That was, the billing used to go through the Department of Social Services, but then it was put back on to the provider, so we had to do that. Now we're also going to be going with brokers, so that's going to be additional administrative costs. So we're now up to 3 administrative assistants in that department along with a manager, because we have to have someone who is dedicated for scheduling and dispatch, one who is in charge of maintenance and verification, 1 biller, and 1 manager. Now that does not include any type of human resources oversight in our billing department. We've had to go and make so many changes within how the agency operates to accommodate all the coding and how we break down everything based on DOT requirements.
How do your prices compare to the local taxi cab services?
It depends on the location. If we have someone who's a regular passenger, it's cheaper than doing just a one trip. But because taxis are not bound to some of the requirements that we are, if we were able to be at full capacity, it could be cheaper. But because of us not being at full capacity, it does impact. But we've not changed our cost to any rider for several years because we didn't want to pass on along that. So we've been absorbing it.
But how do your rates compare to taxi cab service?
It just depends on the location. We try to stay comparative too. If we were able to go and take 1 passenger, it would probably be a little bit more because we have so many more requirements and out-of-pocket fees and so forth, and it costs more to move the bigger vehicles. That's why we've been trying through our vehicle replacement to go with a smaller, more cost-efficient type of vehicle to reduce the cost of fuel and so forth. We spent $80,000 just in fuel and camera expenses just the year before to reflect a real good, a normal year without COVID. But in some cases it can be cheaper. We do compete with the taxi cabs when it comes to referrals from DSS, but when it comes to the brokers, that's going to change because you have to meet so many more requirements with the brokers.
Does that mean the prices will go up or they'll go down?
No, sir, it will not change. It's, the referrals that were normally going to DSS, the brokers, they want to work with transit systems because you can put more people on a vehicle and utilize the vehicle more cost effectively. They're trying to save costs because the cost they save, it goes in their pocket. Because they're not a nonprofit, they are for profit.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Yes, sir.
Asked all the right questions, but this here is, did you state that if 3 people go to Raleigh, each one of those people pay the same thing as one person goes? So
We can't put 3 people, depending on
I'm
their
saying just use
wheelchair.
that as a number.
If they can share the cost, they'll be able to share
I
the
mean, if it's
cost.
$125 trip and 2 people go, is that $75 a piece or is it $125 a piece?
We're not able to take 3. I understand that if we
How
could,
about 2?
if 2, the problem is we're using minivans, we're using 1. If we can do, we try to reduce the cost, yes, sir, so that it's not such a hardship on someone out of pocket.
Okay. And how much is that is paid through Medicaid or Medicare?
If it is a medical appointment, we do not contract for Medicare.
That goes through DSS.
That, yes, it's not passed on to transit systems, and also the brokers are not doing Medicare right now either. It's strictly Medicaid. If it's a Medicaid trip for a doctor's appointment, then Medicaid does pay for it.
Now, some of your people that you're taking to the dialysis center, if they don't have funds, what happens?
We try to use some funds, but they're quite limited, EdTap funds, that we try to exhaust those, but it only usually covers about 6 passengers.
What happens if do you leave them sitting in the house?
We try to look for additional funding. We have received a grant from the hospital for $5,000 to help try to extend people as much as we can because we know that it's a life-sustaining type of treatment that they need. So we do what we can. Luckily, most of the individuals are able to help us pay for it.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Thank you very
You're
much.
quite welcome. Thank you.
Turn it back over to you, Brian.
So Lloyd's going to speak to you for just a couple of minutes about the reval piece.
Is this pertaining to the letter that you passed out?
All right, good evening, everyone. So we'll start off reading just a little bit I had prepared based on that letter. As stated in the mail item from May 10th, 2021, the North Carolina Department of Revenue advises that Beaufort County conducts its next reappraisal at the earlier of the currently scheduled reappraisal or 2024. As you gentlemen know, to my knowledge, our next one is scheduled for 2026, January 1st, 2026. So what the Department of Revenue is advising is to move up the schedule 2 years. The reason for this letter, and you can almost say this is an automatically generated letter in some ways. What happens is when your county sales ratio dips below a certain amount, they're going to generate a letter such as this. They're going to send a letter such as this. There's a couple different times they do this. Essentially what has happened is your sales ratio, in essence, is what the tax value and the sales value are against each other. In this particular case, we, the county, send every year, 4 quarters, we send a sampling of sales that they request. They pick it, we request, they request. We send the sales data from arm's length transactions, and some of them don't end up being, and they take that into effect as well, and take those out, and they look at what our sales ratio is. And this year, as of this letter, I think we were let know maybe just a week before that letter, we are in the high 89 percentile in sales ratio. So we've dipped right under that 0.9 that they look at. Now, what this means is a recommendation. That's exactly what it is. It is not the Department of Revenue, to my knowledge, does not have the ability pursuant, unless the legislature changed something, to make you go any sooner or do anything to that degree. However, this is a recommendation. Now, I'll try to be really brief, but I do want to hit on a couple things. One thing that is important and important to know There's another time when sales ratio comes into play. That'll be next year. I've mentioned it to you gentlemen before. What's going to happen next year, very likely. If the economy stays where it is, there's another scenario the Department of Revenue deals with, and that's where essentially if our sales ratio does not go up, and I cannot see that it will, because this year's been a good market. It's been a strong market. I don't think right now it will, at least. And we continue on the path of dropping down, that ratio dropping a little bit, then what's going to happen is next year, they're going to essentially reassess our public utility. In other words, what that happens is they apply whatever percentage our sales ratio for next year is as a county, they apply that number to our public utility value. And then we then tax that. I'll give a quick example. Public utility value, I think, public knowledge, public utility value, I believe is 144 million, I think, or whatever. You would apply that 85% to that before you apply the tax rate. This is something that I've actually mentioned so before. I've had discussion with Brian. They're aware of this. There's a very good chance we could have that happen next year. That's one reason they send this. They want us to be aware. That'll continue each year till the 7th year. In the 7th year, what will happen? They'll look again. In other words, the 7th year will be the 7th year after the revow. Next year will be the 4th. They'll look again in the 7th year. What happens is they take that percentage and apply it to the public utility. So in other words, let's say next year is 85%. It's a good round number. It would follow the so to speak, it would follow the pattern. Next year, they'd apply that 85. They do it the following year. Then in the 7th year, what they're going to end up doing, they're going to do whatever percentage our sales ratio was from slightly before. You're talking, and again, I'm, trying to be very high level with this. I mean, you're basically talking revenue, 140 to 160,000 perhaps for next year, but it will be every year. In the 7th year, it will be a lot higher, I would believe, if the economy continues doing what it does. I don't have a crystal ball. I can't tell you the real estate market is going to keep doing what it's doing, but I think we all know it's moving really quick. Your three options, and I'll be done. Your three options are we maintain at 2026, we could move forward, or we could move forward to 2025. That would eliminate the 7th year. You wouldn't have to worry about that quite as much. Moving all the way to a 2024, I do have some concerns about that, but again, I do serve at the board's pleasure. I would think that's something we might want to discuss. Y'all might want to know more about. I'm just here to let y'all know. That's what the letter said. That's what's going on. That's what we're doing. We've been working on making sure that all the data is there for sales and everything else for the state to do this research they do, and we came in at under 90%.
So Lloyd, I guess what you're saying is if we do move it up a year, we're going to have to bump up our annual contribution to the revow.
Yes, sir.
Which, is that 162? Yes. Okay.
So just and that is correct. And of course, thankfully we have finance officer knows this better than I do what the amount is. But if you were going to move it up, I would actually almost suggest a year, not two. You move it up a year, you have a lot of good things you can do with that. One, you wouldn't lose that 7th year reassessment piece. You can still take advantage of the market to some degree, or if something's moving in a way y'all don't like, theoretically you could move it back to the year it was originally. So if you were considering to move it forward, I would probably suggest 2025 gives us 3.5 years to do an RFP, find a company, do the work, et cetera, as opposed to just 2.5 years.
Any other questions of Lloyd? Yeah, but it would be during our June 1st meeting if we need to change the amount, I guess, or we could do that at a later date, but.
I think you could do it at a later day. I mean, you just don't want to push it too far out. Lloyd needs to know because he would have to get some work done and put in place if you're going to go out and adjust it. Obviously, what he said is it would be very problematic for us to move it 2 years closer.
Right.
1 year closer, 7th year would probably be okay, and we can make those adjustments, but we can't let it linger too much longer.
There's pros and cons for all of it, but I agree with what the manager said on that. Yes, absolutely.
Any other? Thank you, Lloyd.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Chairman, we are starting on public safety tonight in the general fund, and we start with the Sheriff's Office. Chief Deputy Rose is here tonight to answer any questions the board may have regarding their budget. And I will tell you that you can see on the line items we went back and forth on these. So.
Questions concerning the, you want to take them one at a time? We'll start with the Sheriff's Office budget.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak on behalf of the Sheriff on the Sheriff's budget. I have several handouts, just like I do each year. The first one, so you said you want to start with the Sheriff's budget overall?
Or, if you were planning a different one, that's fine. That's the first one we have in our book, Charlie. Thank you.
I do have an email that was sent by Commissioner Richardson and also by Commissioner Repholz, so I think most of the questions that they have will probably be answered, but I do have written answers to that, and I'll give to each commissioner and to the county manager on that as well. So there are several lines in the Sheriff's Office budget that I wanted to discuss with the board specifically. After the negotiations with the county manager and the finance officer, that I just wanted to bring up is that the budget that we have, that as far as the line items for salaries, benefits, operational expenses, and capital purchases are that continuation budget piece. So that is set at a FTE level of 89. And I think that's very important for us to discuss moving forward because there were deductions that were made along the budget that takes us to that 89 number and not anything else throughout further debate that would need to be maybe adjusted back up if more FTEs were to be added back to the budget starting in July. So with the first number being overtime, of course, we have been trending over the last 2 or 3 years with overtime in the sheriff's budget are right at $300,000. The reason that it's been sticking at that number is because of the normal overtime that we would have for late calls that take deputies into 3 and 4 hours beyond their 12-hour shift, to major incidents, which we have been having more over the last 2 years than we did in previous years, that could have 5 or 6 up to 10 deputies that are working 24 hours in a row, just depending on what type of crime or incident that we have. Then over the last 2 or 3 years, we've also had at least 1, if not 2, if not even 3 major incidents that would cause overtime on a continuing basis. If we would have a hurricane that would cause shelters to open, then we would have someone at each shelter that's open for 24 hours a day. And each one of those minutes or hours, however you want to look at it, would be overtime hours. With the issues that we had in the jail, which hopefully we won't have issues like that, at least for the next handful of years, we would actually be operating multiple facilities. So we would split our staff up into 2 and sometimes 3 facilities, meaning that at least 2 of those facilities every minute would be an overtime minute. So that we have had different drivers that would put that overtime number up. And that was with us being at 102 or 107 personnel. Moving down to 89, we're really dropping the staffing level back down to about 2012 or 2013, and it would be really hard for us to go back that far and compare apples to apples, what we would need to do to take staffing levels back to that point and how that would affect the services that go along with it. So at 250, just right offhand, if something doesn't change, we're gonna roll past that 250 about February. I mean, and that's just based off of how things have gone for the last 2 or 3 years, and things have been pretty much on that steady track for the last 2 or 3 years that you could see that. The next line at 89 is the uniform line. Uniforms has always been an issue and tough to really gauge when it comes to the point that we get to between what we at the sheriff's office feel we need and what the comfortable number that the county manager puts in his recommended budget. At $62,706, that puts that even with the level of 47 sworn deputies, which is where we're looking that we would be at 89 employees, we would go from 65 sworn deputies to 47 sworn deputies. That puts that at about $1,300 per year per deputy. Now, part of the uniform line, and probably one of the more expensive items that would go there, would be your body armor. Body armor itself would be about $750 per unit. Right now, we're on the scale where we try to do a quarter of the body armor each year. So at that level, it would be 15 at the 750. A large chunk of the uniform line is going to get caught up just by the one piece of equipment, and that's body armor. Now, if with new deputies, at any given year, we're going to have anywhere from 5 to a dozen new deputies come in. To outfit a new deputy is going to be more like $3,000. And that's because they need stuff that's for them. It's hard really just to go off the rack and to outfit a deputy, because that deputy might be anywhere from 5'2" to 6'8", might be anywhere from 150 pounds to 250 pounds. And you need to make sure that they're wearing the appropriate gear, the appropriate uniform, and that they have a certain look. You don't want them to look sloppy. And that's more than just the look. That is a command presence, an officer presence, a deterrent for any of the bad stuff that could go on for a law enforcement officer at a call. So it's very important. Next line is law enforcement supplies. Just to talk about that number, it's been at $40,000 steadily for the last 4 or 5 years. I just wanted to point out in the spreadsheet that I gave you, ammunition covers about half of that. We spend about $20,000 on ammo each year for the training and qualifications that we have to have. Then evidence and materials and supplies, there's a certain way that we've got to maintain custody of evidence. We've got to have it a certain way. There's no deviations or anything that we have to do, which means that we have to have the proper material. We have to package it in the appropriate way, and that's a cost that we have to have. And then the third highlight that I have is evidence destruction. For the past handful of years, we've been spending anywhere from $3,000 to $6,000 in that we actually pay out to animal control to dispose of the evidence that have gone through the process and it's time to get destroyed. So they use their incinerators after we get the court orders to destroy the stuff, and we use that for destruction, but we still have to pay. And I understand that it is a cost for them, but that's also a cost for us. And as of those 3 items that I bring out of $40,000, we've talked about $40,000. You have the spreadsheet on the other things that we use that particular line item for, and it covers a lot of ground. I have a concern about fuel costs, but I have a concern about fuel costs each year. Over the last handful of years, it's been pretty steady as far as the price per gallon cost. But as we've seen just over the last couple of weeks and the trend that's moving forward since this year has started, the gas prices are going higher and higher and higher. And it's just one of those things where we try to budget the best we can, but, we only have certain alternatives. We can pay whatever we need to for gas, or we can stop driving. So we try to hit the mark, but that one I definitely have a concern over, with 168 being where we've been the last handful of years and then going down to 150 now. And the last mention that I wanted to say on the sheriff's office budget for my concerns is in equipment. If you remember, over the last year, we have really done a good job through the partnership with the Sheriff's Office and the Commissioners over upgrading into the advancements of our body cameras and the in-car cameras to go with it. And it's phenomenal, the amount of information, whether it's evidence or whether it's training or whatever good purpose that you want to think about when it comes to cameras, being another view of any instance that we have received the benefit from all of those, but at a very high cost. So at the recommended level of equipment being at $100,000, $59,000 of that each year is going to be the body cameras and the in-car cameras. I mentioned that to mention that in 2024, 2025, the handheld Viper radios that we carry, that we've had for about 10 years, they're reaching their serviceable end of life. And it's not like sort of the old radio equipment with the VHF or UHF that the older it got, it just wouldn't work as well. Once these radios get to the point where they're at the end of life and Viper cuts them off, they're done. I mean, they're paperweights. So at $4,000 or $5,000 per unit, we've got 10 units that can last beyond 24 or 25. And at whatever staffing level that we are, we're going to have anywhere from 55 to 65 of those radios purchased and in hand before the end of 24, 25. So instead of just hitting one year and saying, hey, we're going to need $250,000 for radios, we're going to try to purchase 10 or 12 each year. So for each vehicle and the capital cost that goes along with that, since we've got mobile Viper radios, we're going to include the handheld with that. We'd also like to purchase 3 or 4 to get us up to that point where we're buying about 10 radios a year, so we can be okay at the end of their service life. That's just something that I mentioned last year. I'm going to mention again this year through at least thoughts and discussions of that. So we're talking 2 pieces of equipment that eats up the entire appropriations for equipment if we don't do something else. So those are my concerns that I had with the Sheriff's Office budget. But I know that the main purpose of me being here would be to answer questions that commissioners have, so I'm ready for any of those.
Randy?
The color coding, what is that? Is there a reason?
Sure. The spreadsheet that you have in front, that's me giving you my spreadsheet of how I understand and keep up with our budget. So the brown would be for the patrol division request. The green would be for the drug unit and criminal investigators request. The blue would be an IT request. Red would be specifically for evidence. And then yellow or gold would be for front office or training purposes. That just helps me keep my thoughts organized.
The storage building that's in the budget that you're recommending, Brian, did I understand is that going to be partly used for evidence or not?
It would be our hope that we would be able to construct a facility that would be able to do that. Chief Rose and I have had some conversations regarding their needs and what we are currently expending on storage, and based on American Rescue Act funds, I believe that may be an opportunity for us to use additional money through that, because I got an estimate the end of last week, and it's about double what I put in there. So, but for that particular building, so we would need to do something additional along those lines. But that would be our hope, that we could do that in some form where it could be highly secured, and they would have an opportunity to be able to put stuff there, and as well as vehicles that may get seized or things like that. So, yes.
Now, if you're talking about evidence, we're talking about a room that's climate controlled and a room that has steel walls, concrete walls, extra security, and a room that has a ceiling in it that's impenetrable.
Yeah, typically, and Chief Rhodes can speak to that, in the areas that they currently have storage, I mean, they use chain link. It's chain link where it's covered and on both sides and on the top, and it is climate controlled. And that's essentially what we would be looking at, some form of that, maybe using split units. Wouldn't necessarily look to condition the entire area of that building, but probably certain areas of the building.
We probably have camera protection and some other kind of tamper notice.
But in general, and you'll see part of the maintenance funds that have been recommended this year is to move toward card access on facilities so that we have a record of who goes in, what time they go in, and what time they go out. So similar cameras and similar that, but then a secondary lock-in mechanism that the sheriff's office would control, that we would have no control over.
That's what I'm
at
saying.
all.
The sheriff's facilities have to be separate
Yes, sir.
from anything we would do.
That's correct. They would have individual control of that, just like EMS has individual control of like narcotics and those.
Maybe
kind of
their
things.
own entrance.
If I may, we have on-site at the sheriff's office storage, and we also have the vast majority of the storage that we have is off-site. We will enter into agreements with the vendor that we are renting the space from, that we pretty much go in and we put the secured barricade. To your point, we use motion, video, and secure area for our specific needs in our areas that are separate from anyone else. Part of the conversation that we had going into this negotiation is that the vendor that we had an opportunity with the vendor that we've been dealing with over the last couple of years, where they purchased another building. They were going to upfit that for more climate controlled storage. We have been in the building that we're in. Every time a unit would open up, we would grab that additional space and unit, and then we would have to keep on extending our barricade and barrier out. With the opportunity that we had, it could have been that we could have jumped in at the beginning. They would have helped design it sort of for us. It was good for the vendor because they knew that it was guaranteed money. They knew that we would pay the bill, that they wouldn't have to go back and make sure that each individual unit that they had was being rented out. And then that's what we took to the negotiations, to understand that we may be moving forward when it comes to storage for countywide, and I think that would be great. I think that's a need for most of the agencies that you have. It's just we need a lot of space between now and then. So if we're going to stay in the same spot that we are for at least this next year, we are going to need to continue. Every time a unit opens up, we'll grab it, we'll grab some more space, and we'll do that until a more semi-permanent note's done by the county. And I hope that answers your question.
What's causing the growth in the need for storage space? That you're not trying the cases because of COVID, or?
No, I would say probably more need for especially evidence storage is that the rules keep on changing about how long you have to keep evidence. I mean, really, if there's a felony that's committed, there's not a charge that goes along with that felony, then we have to keep that evidence forever. There's no statute of limitations on felonies. So if it's fine if you've got an envelope, but if you have a bicycle or a motorcycle or something that has any size that you've got to keep forever, then that eats up space pretty quickly. With the digital age that we have, that actually helped for a little bit, but in a way it's almost like going paperless. When you go paperless, it seems like you use more paper than when you did before. We're running into that issue as well with the digital age of us. We're having to keep more and more evidence, where 5 years ago we had about 12,000 pieces of evidence at any given time. Now we're in between 14 and 15, and there's no reason to think that number is going to go down anytime soon. It's probably just going to increase.
The need for keeping felony evidence dies when the felon dies.
Well, if you have an unsolved felony, then it's more about the victim
Gotcha.
than the suspect, of course.
Other questions? John?
We're talking about rental. Is that the line storage rental?
That is yes.
Okay. And you had asked for 50,000 or 60,000, I think, and it was cut to 30?
Correct.
are you gonna be, is that gonna be a problem?
No,
Right now, you're forecasted to spend 24 this year.
the 24 is the exact number for the units that we had going into last year. I asked for 60 because of that opportunity for the building that could just been used by the sheriff's office. That would have been a indoor and outdoor laydown yard, enough space inside to cover all the sheriff's office needs. And then since we were getting on it right away, then we would be able to get the jump on all of the other needs as far as fencing, alarms, cameras, everything else to go along with it. So that was what caused that 60,000. It would cover the rental, plus the upgrades and updates that we would need to do to make that building able for us to use it as a sheriff's office.
So on an annual basis, you would be able to, for $60,000, take care of your storage needs for evidence?
We would be, well, yes, we would be able to cover all of our needs, and then we would also have a little bit of space left over if the county needed some of that for something that they could have used that as well. But like I said, we didn't pick the building. The building was actually brought to us saying, hey, this could be an idea. We thought it was a really good idea. If we could make it work, we could make it work for 60, and that would give us a little bit more space than what we needed now. But, you know, I understand if 30 is approved, then we'll stick with what we're doing, plus grabbing the additional units when they open.
Brian, is there a reason why, I assume this is the document you furnished when we were talking about what your request was? Is there a reason why the numbers on here for the request are different than the ones in our book?
Well,
in terms of the total?
I can hit on that.
Okay.
Is that, once again, this is my spreadsheet. And I keep the entire budget process from us, from the division request to my cut to the cut that's made after we talk with the manager and the finance officer. So you will see the different numbers, and that's in my way trying to be fully transparent on the process as it goes. But no, you see the numbers that you see from the county, I guess, are going to be more consistent with what you see from the other agencies that you have. And if nothing else, I just wanted you to see that, because there's been sometimes over talk of the year that whatever we ask for becomes the manager's budget, and that's never the case. That's never the case. That the negotiation is entertaining and engaging and sometimes fun, but I've never walked out of that room feeling like I got over on the manager.
Well, good for the manager. On the line item on, what was it? House arrest?
Sure.
Okay. You asked for 40, we put in 30. Does that mean you're going to be able to do less of those than you would?
House arrest on that number specifically was based on trends of what we've spent the last 2 or 3 years. Everybody that is in our jail for more than about 2 or 3 days goes through the process for pretrial release. Everybody. You know, and if we can put anybody on pretrial release, if we can get a judge to sign off on it, then they go on pretrial release. You know, so I do not disagree with the number that the manager put in, because that is a trend over the last 3 years, even with the COVID year. But, you know, historically we've tried to have 40, because that for every dollar that you spend on PTR, you're actually probably saving $2, because they're not in the jail. You know, they've got the ankle bracelet on and they're out. So we're not having to feed them. We're not having to take care of every need that they have. If they fall off the bed and stump their toe, we're not having to sit with them at the hospital for 24 to 48 hours. So that is where, over the last years, I've tried to argue for the 40. So just in case I don't have to dip into it, because everything that we're going to need for PTR, we're going to use on PTR, if we have to do budget amendments to get it in there. But with that being said, also, I am, if the trends hold up, then I am perfectly okay with the number being at 30 that the manager requested.
Commissioner Booth?
Concerning your gym membership here, $77 and $450. You requested 34, and I think it was recommended to get 16. What's driving that? You got 77 people that's going to the gym.
Well, it's the driving the number is that we're trying to forecast and make sure that we've got enough funds for everybody who wants to be a part of that program. But then the manager recommends based on trends what we've spent, and then that's what his recommended.
Now do just your do just your uniform officers go, or do everybody go?
Every employee of the sheriff
Okay.
have access to a gym
At
membership.
today, how many people that you have going?
I'd say probably about half of our agency
40.
goes.
50.
Yes, I'd say about half of our employees. So in between that 40 and 44.
And the second question here, I want to apply for this job. You requested $71,000 for a chaplain. I can do a good prayer for $71,000. What's driving that?
Here, let me go to it. That might actually be a typo.
Okay, I hope it is. We've got two preachers in here, and God knows, I don't think neither one of them getting $71,000 to pray for them.
Yeah, I think the reserve deputies line, the part-time line, also covers the chaplain. So that's, I think the total request for reserve deputies or part-time or sworn was $25,000 in the budget.
Okay. So if you don't get the 71,000, we're gonna get the same level of prayer service.
Well, I hope we get more. I mean, I don't want to shy away from it, but if anybody wants to pray for us, I'm not going to hold them back on it.
Thank you. That's all.
Thank you.
When did we start the chaplain service in the county?
Well, I've been with the sheriff's office since 2004.
Yeah.
Miss Lily Sutton was the chaplain for Sheriff Jordan. She had been there for years and years and years before then. We, in the last handful of years, Kevin Woolard, who's a full-time deputy, was a jailer, then went full-time, then went part-time, is now back full-time. He is also a pastor in Grifton. Once again on that is that if I could have 5 chaplains, we'd figure out a way to have 5 chaplains. But for the most part, those are people that are already working with us. We just try to differentiate that when it comes to the budget stuff because that is another service that they provide.
They've been steadily going up each year, the amount of money we spend for the chaplain.
Well, no, and like I said, the chaplain piece is just a piece of the part-time budget, which I think has been at $25,000 for the sheriff forever.
Yeah.
So it's a part of that. Is that if we have auxiliary deputies or part-time deputies, we use those over the course of whatever we need. And then that part-time help that is doing chaplain work is also either working in the front office or working as a deputy as well.
Okay. I think it's just the figure, $71,000.
Yeah, and like I said, I don't see that. If you are seeing that, then that is a typo. It's $25,000 is the recommended fee. Now, if you would like to fund $71,000 for part-time, I'd be happy with that. I might get a look from the manager though, but I mean, you probably are. It's just, if it is, it's a typo. My apologies.
Other questions before we move to the jail?
I have one.
Okay.
Well, I have 2 or 3, actually. The $5,473,000, that's for the 89 that's in the budget.
Correct.
Right, I mean, it's in the proposed budget, put it correctly. That's for 89, all right. The list, the questions, I realize it was short notice, Charlie, but what about your vehicles and their mileage?
Okay, I do. If I can, I've got the handout.
Thank you.
I didn't get a list.
I've got that as well.
Oh, okay.
Thank you, sir. So on the first set of handouts that I gave you was the email that Brian sent, the email that Commissioner Richardson sent, and then the written responses to each, along with the handout that I also gave you with the vehicle information, which is our standard. Once again, this is my spreadsheet that I use throughout the course of the year. This is a spreadsheet that's shared with risk management at least 2 or 3 times a year when they're dealing with the insurance piece for our vehicles. And, so nothing hidden, nothing moved. That is the vehicles that we have, as close to up-to-date mileage as I can get, which, believe me, it would be more of a benefit for you than it would be for me to have lower mileage up there. And then the deputy or employee that the vehicle is assigned to. As far as that answers number 1, which we can talk about once you digest a little bit of that information. The questions 2 or 3 were how many unfilled orders for new vehicles do we have and how many new vehicles received in this budget year. The written answer is the Sheriff's Office was appropriated $200,000 to purchase and equip patrol vehicles. We have purchased 4 vehicles. The quotes were obtained, purchase orders were submitted and signed off on. The purchase orders were approved by the commissioners. The vehicles were ordered and built. The order has been delayed. The information that we get is because of COVID, just like everything else that's been delayed over the last year. They now show an in-transit as their status with expected delivery date to the dealership in North Carolina on May 27th. And then it should be received by us at our vendor that does the upgrade of all the other information, other equipment that we have upfitted probably 2 days after that. So that's the best information that we have at this time. But I've always been the type until we have the keys, the titles, and can drive the vehicles, then I don't know where the vehicles are. And right now we do not have them yet, but they have been purchased, the paperwork has been done, and they are in transit. Let's see, I did have a little bit of fun with you on number 4. I think that was a typo on the written justification for increases of number of employers. We only need 1 sheriff. I mean, that is all. And then plus, I knew I was going to answer that in the next question, and I hope that the written justification for the request that has been talked about as far as 5, and I understand why, but the thing that I just wanted to sort of be chewed on, at least thought over, was that you asked me, and I will say Commissioner Booth is looking at me smiling, you tell me, don't hold back when we're asking for what we need, and that's what I'm doing, is that I know the decision is going to be discussed by commissioners, and it's going to be chewed on and can be debated. The number that I've heard is 5. The number that we're saying that makes us as whole as we can be after losing 18 sworn officers over the last 2 budget cycles is an addition of 8 that we're going to throw on the road. So we'll go from 5 positions if we're fully staffed on the road to 7 positions on the road. That puts us where we can hit the outlying areas of the county even more than what we have been doing, and we've been getting more feedback, more positive feedback from the places like Pinetown, Pantiga, Belhaven, Aurora, down 306. We've been getting good feedback on that, but the more we have on the road, the more we can push out into the county, the more transports that we can handle without calling people in for overtime purposes. The status of our calls is changing. Where 4 or 5 years ago we were able to do calls that are normal routine calls and be in and out in 20 or 30 minutes. And now just because of the different climate that we're in, we're having to send more deputies to more calls, and we're having to spend more time there. Even arrests that were made that were relatively simple back years ago, sometimes we're having to have multiple deputies spend several hours with the individual from the time of the incident to the time of the arrest to the time of getting to the magistrate's office to the time of depositing to the jail. So all of those things are changing, and we're having to change with it. I can show you. Of course, I'm not ready for that tonight, but at any time, a commissioner can get in contact with me, and I can show you video after video after video of what now can be considered a normal call that law enforcement officers are going to. I have it written, and you definitely can read it, but another thing that I wanted to hit on is that the amount of calls that we're responding to as law enforcement officers to EMS calls, to fire calls, where in years past we were there just for pretty much crowd control and traffic control if need be. But over the last handful of years, we are actually being used more as first responders, in pit crew CPR, handling the first responder issues that we are trained to do, and that we can be a benefit to the EMS service or to the fire service, and actually perform and be a part of life-saving measures that are being done. And those are things that we can do with people, with folks on the road, with folks working, that sometimes we can't if we don't have that. Is that we want to help when we can, but if we have domestic calls going on, or we have armed robbery calls or breaking and entering calls, we've got to do those law enforcement pieces first. But we want to help out our partners in the field as much as we can, and that is also dictated in that number as well. So, any questions, Commissioner Richardson or anybody else, based off of your list?
I'd just like to point out, you probably running, last year you were running about 52 or 53,000 on the average vehicle. This year you're probably running close to the same thing, and if you take out these school resource officers, which are gone, which get the higher mileage, and they're still up like 120, 130,000 mile cars, your numbers are going to drop way down.
Sure.
And the commissioners need to take a look at this in doing the budget and purchasing new cars last year, with 4 new ones coming in here at the end of the year.
I'll agree with your sentiment. Last year, we received a reduction in vehicles. For 2 or 3 years before then, we had gotten to the ebb and flow that we were purchasing about 10 vehicles per year, and that was based on the staffing numbers that we had. Well, of course, if we're down 18, then we're not going to need as many vehicles as 10 per year. That put us on a cycle where we would be cycling vehicles out on the 7th or 8th year. With the new number, if it's at 47, which if you don't add any more, we're at 47. I would love for us to at least maybe try to get back to 55 over the course of the discussions. But that would limit the amount of vehicles. The manager's requested number for vehicles this year is another 200,000, so that puts it down to 5 again. With the vehicles that we're getting in within the next week, that'll be outfitted within the next 2 months, with the 4 or 5 vehicles that we're going to be able to keep from the SRO vehicles, and with the hopefully $200,000 that'll be appropriated for vehicles in the next budget year, that would put us on that would be able to band-aid this patch. But then even at 47 sworn deputies, that puts us at probably 55 to 56 vehicles. Remember, we've got a bus, we've got 2 transit vans, we're going to need to have a couple of spares. So that's still going to put us at that 55 or 56 number. That puts us back to, if we can get to a point where we are purchasing 7 or 8 vehicles per year, then that keeps us at the replacing the vehicles on a routine schedule.
Talking about the last item in here, justification for these 5 new deputies. Does the Sheriff's Department file reports with the state, any agency, on the crime level in Beaufort County?
We do send statuses for uniform crime reports. I believe that's what you're asking about. That's the statistics that are held through the SBI and the FBI. The SBI administers that program for the state, and we do send those numbers. The latest numbers that you can get for Beaufort County, or really any other municipality or county on that's 2018. They haven't gotten to the point where they've released 19 or 20. Those numbers for Beaufort County makes us look exactly like what we are. We're one of the safest counties in the state. The 2 spikes that you see on us would be violent crimes, which is completely for us driven by how many homicides we would have in the course of a year. We're right at the state level as far as that goes. And then larcenies and property crimes are very high for us. And we attribute that to the drug issues that we have. So drugs, and then larcenies and
Why can't
Property
commissioners
crimes
get those
also.
reports when you send them? Why aren't they sent to commissioners?
So the end product, you can get just like we can get by going on to the SBI website. The raw data is sent in number of calls that are automatically generated through our CAD system under different codes that the state sets up. And then those, like almost like an auto draft, that information is zapped to Raleigh, and then they put it into,
And that's what they're
Data.
2 years behind in reporting.
well, I'm not going to speak anything that the state does, because one, if I'll get it wrong, and then two, I'll give them too much credit. So,
But there's another report that you send that's more or less a hard copy report, or is all of your reporting done by the computer online?
if you have something in mind, I'd be more than willing to talk to you, and if we have it, I'll show it to you and give you copies of it. But for the life of me right now, I don't know what report you're speaking of.
Well, you said that you file regular reports with SBI/FBI on crime rates having to do with crime statistics in Beaufort County.
It's more of data that's forwarded. So if someone calls in to 911 and says, someone broke into my house and stole my car, they enter the information into the computer system, into our computer-aided dispatch, and then different codes are set up based off of what they report and what our incident report would say. And then for each one of those blocks that's filled out, that data, that information would be sent monthly through, I think IBRs is what it's called now, and then that is sent to the state along with every other agency in the state that's participating.
But you can print that out.
We can try. I don't know if it would, yes, we can print it out. I don't know if we would be able to sit down together and tell you what it means when we're looking at it, but yes, we can.
Well, I mean, other counties have it every month.
Okay. If you point out what other county has it, I'm sure we can duplicate what they have.
How about Gaston County?
Sure.
Their stuff's online every month.
Yeah, which I pay
Number of
attention a little
domestic
bit. Like, our
calls.
drug unit's way better than theirs. So.
The number of domestic calls that they make, the number of drug calls they make, drug
Yeah.
arrests, it goes on and on and on.
Yeah, I can take a look at it, and I'm sure that you'll be pleased or very disappointed by the numbers that you get if we're compared to Gaston County.
Well, that's you asked for one county that does it. That's a county that I know that does it.
So if you would like to get together with me, we can talk about it and whatever you want. I'm sure that we can. If Gaston County can do it, I'm sure that I can come up with something comparable.
Okay.
There is a report in the Washington Daily News once a week.
Yes, and that's, once again, that's a batch based off of computer-aided dispatch that's sent, which right now the person that normally does that is not doing that anymore, so we're having to figure out who's going to do that over the next week or so. So any delays that we're having is because of that. We'll get that straightened out soon. Okay, good news. The jail's pretty straightforward this year. The main drivers on the jail, the stuff that we just don't know, is that eventually, the court system is going to open back up. Every judge that I talk to is ready to get back to business as usual. The reason that our numbers have been low in the jail as far as population most likely are because of the COVID compliance issues that we're trying to fulfill at the state level and the federal level is putting us out. The lowering of bonds during COVID to make sure that we were trying to house as few people as possible. Well, all of those things are going to sort of get back to a normal thing. And then the difficulties when you talk about the jail budget is, are we trying to budget for a COVID year? Or are we trying to budget for a year that's going to get back to normal and we're going to have to spend normal amounts of money? So what you see is sort of a hybrid of that. The only thing that I really have highlighted to talk about is if you look at the spreadsheet that I gave you for equipment, there's right in the middle section of that, you'll see a camera system that was requested for us to put in the budget from EIS. That we just flat out looked and talked about it, and we felt that there was no way that we could even possibly try to chew on that in the course of a year. So that's there, and that actually is probably the main driving force of that request to me from the division at $130,000, but then the request or the recommended at $20,000, which covers really the normal equipment that we would need. But the spreadsheet that I just want you to see that when you think of equipment purchases for a detention center, most of the time you would think of things like handcuffs, leather gear that goes with that. But if you look down that list, that's more of operational equipment that the jail needs, computer issues, server, relays, things like that. So all of those are important, and all of those are going to need to be covered sometime over the course of the next couple of years. We just do like we've been doing, and we'll figure out along the way how to get those things done. But does anybody have any questions on any particular lines?
When you look at the inmate prescriptions, it appears that if you annualize the numbers for 2021, we're going to be somewhere in that 28 to 30,000, and I guess that's being driven by the lower number of inmates.
Yeah, we get I get a report every day. I actually get 2 reports a day talking about the inmate population. And we've been, sometimes over the course of the last year, we were in the 20s, and then we slowly, or as the months have gone on, we got to the point where we were steadily in the 30s, and now steadily in the 40s, now we're steadily in the 50s, and there's really no reason to believe that trend is not going to keep on going back up to what our old normal rate was in between 60 and 70. And I say that and I feel confident in saying that because we still have several courts that really aren't running. You're not having we don't have weekenders right now. We're not having child support court. We're not having several courts that will normally generate at least a day traveler or two to come through the jail on a regular basis. And that's just a couple of examples. We're also not running the same amount of administrative superior court sessions, which really drives the jail number up. Not just for the amount of people that's in the jail after they get sentenced, but the amount of people who are being incarcerated elsewhere throughout the state that we have to move into our jail a week before they have their hearing in Beaufort County. And then if they get time, then we send them to wherever they need to. Or after that hearing, then we get them back to the jails that they were being incarcerated in before we picked them up. So all of those things are going to come up, and they're going to come up this year.
Question. Do we have video visitation in the jail?
We do, and good gracious, everybody in this room knows that we've been trying to get video visitation into our jail for a long, long time. The best application that we have right now is what we have right now, and that is the use of, and we actually had to help other sheriffs get a law changed to allow tablets into a jail facility, because that was once everybody started to do that, it realized that, hey, that's a misdemeanor for every time that a jailer would give a tablet to an inmate, whether it was approved or not. So the law had to change for doing that. And now we're doing most of the communications that we have from inmates to family or inmates, whether it's visitation, inmates through arraignment, everything but telemedicine we can do through the tablets that we have.
Now that's fee charged
if
Yes.
they're calling their family or whatever.
Yes, there are a couple of exceptions, but most of that is the stuff that would have to do by law. Like if they want to talk to an attorney, we can't charge them, but most attorneys are going to want to walk face to face when they do that. But yes and yes.
Any other, oh,
Maybe this is a typo. Taser car. Requested $130,000 supplemental $32. You actually recommended versus $20,000.
No, well, this one I got you on. The taser cartridges amount is 1,100, first column. The 130,722 would be if you add up every request that was made by the jail on equipment, and that whole entire line, then that's the 130,000. And that may have been what we were looking at when you were talking about the chaplain piece as well. But,
Well, you got them on another one too, because our gym membership for these is $420 a month, and that was $250%.
we do have 2 gyms that they can choose, and the employee can choose either gym that they want since they offer different services. But for budgeting purposes, it probably would be smarter for us to put the same, but that would be the only difference that I can come up with. Yes, sir.
I got one more question. Okay. How much do you pay the Sheriff's Association each year for memberships?
For the membership is relatively inexpensive. It's less than $1,000 for the membership itself.
Uh-huh. What
But
about
then, but then there is a portion that that we pay for every conference, every meeting that we go to. Of course, we're going to pay for hotels if we have to stay there. Neither the sheriff nor I ever submit anything back on meals, so there's not that cost for us on that. But there are costs for each meeting that we go to that we would pay. But the cost itself for the association, I want to say it's less than $900, but I know it's less than $1,000.
any other? You want to go to the communications, Charlie?
All right, one more handout. That's it, I promise.
I'll give you a question I was asked the other day. Are we capable of taking text messages now at 911? I'm assuming no. Okay.
So of all of the budgets that we have at the sheriff's office, it seems that communications is usually the least controversial, but it probably is the most complicated. What complicates the issues with communications budget is that the 911 board determines what you can use for funding through those funds that we get through the 911 board and funding. And sometimes that's a moving target. I'd say just about every year that's a moving target. Up until and including several years ago, we were, our folks have contact when we're making purchases. They send everybody the copies of the paperwork. They get everything approved, pre-approved, post-approved. And sometimes we still get hit, just like, this year we get hit from a couple of years ago saying that we owe the 911 board back of somewhere around $65,000. And if they say that, then you pretty much have to pay it. You pay it or you don't get funds moving forward. Another thing that we're getting hit with through the 911 board is that, if you'll remember with me, that 4 or 5 up to 8 or 9 years ago, the focus of the 911 board was about backup PSAPs. Backup PSAPs. You got, at that time they were saying you needed to have a freestanding building that had an exact replica, working replica of the 911 center that you were using. And it couldn't be within a mile, and it had to be, a certain amount. And during the whole time that we were trying to adjust and get ready for that, well, the rules kept on changing and the technology kept on changing, now to the point that, we can have a backup PSAP by making a phone call to a comparable 911 center anywhere in the state and say, can you take our 911 calls for us? We've got a problem. We make a call to our telephone provider, and then those 911 calls can get shifted handled by the 911 center somewhere else, dispatched directly to us until we have our problems, and we can do the same for other counties, which got us to the point where the restrictions on money spent, the restrictions on the funds that they were given, our 911 center was actually running out of things that we could use those funds on and get approval for, which caused another hit in the yearly funding that we received. And that's sort of my, a little bit more than layman's term summary, but I'll ask if Brian or Anita has any more details or anything else that they can add or anything that needs to be corrected on that, then you know, I'll offer that just to make sure that everything's in full view of the board.
Yeah, I would offer something on that. At your June 7th regular board meeting, you're going to see a budget amendment where we will need to transfer $64,000, and we're going to find that money within the budget, so it's not going to be additional funding that's going to be required. We'll make reductions in the public safety functional area to transfer that $64,000 back to the E911 Special Revenue Fund to cover those ineligible expenses. So if you have any questions about that now, you know, we'll try to answer those. But just like the Chief Deputy said, the state was about 3 years behind in reviewing the reports, the annual reports, because they get audited thoroughly every year. And so it's about 3 years worth, about $20,000 a year is what they determined when they first told us that they would be eligible, and then they said they were ineligible. And what we try to do is claim everything we can to get reimbursed through the surcharge funds, so the general fund won't have to pay it. So now that they've come back and reviewed those 3 years of reports, they're saying they were ineligible, so we've got to cover that with a transfer.
So with that being said, in the communications budget that you see, if at the end of the year you see that there are surpluses, that you're like, why are there surpluses there? It's because during the budgeting we have to sort of play it safe based on we think that 911 will cover this expense, but if they don't, we're still going to need to get it, like the headsets or chairs or, you know, any of the computer elements or radio elements that 911 will service and will purchase. We try to get them to do that, but if they don't, we still have to have those things. So with that being said, we've tried to keep the communications budget as close as we could to previous years. Once again, you've got a spreadsheet that gives the detail down to the dollar in certain sections, especially in the sections that there's going to be changes. To one of your questions, Commissioner Repholz, the equipment line, and why we're up on that is that it's time for us to replace some of the components of the VHF system that we have. They have to be replaced every about 4 to 6 years. That we are looking to do something a little bit different. Right now we're operating off of 2 consolettes, one that you try to completely simplify it, one you're talking out of, one you're listening out of. But when we do it that way, sometimes it can cause a delay, or it causes you to miss some things that are being spoken on of another channel. So we're looking to add a couple of consolettes so we can actually listen to Washington Police, Washington Fire, Beaufort County Fire, Beaufort County EMS, all at the same time if we have to. Where right now, if we did it exactly how we're doing it right now, if Washington and the county were talking at the same time, we'd only hear one of them. And, well, that's not good. And we can fix that for a relatively inexpensive cost of, I think, $14,000 for both units.
Other questions, Charlie? If not, we thank you very much.
Thank you.
Brian?
Yes, sir. So I'm going to take you back to page 24 like we did with the rest of the departments as we run through those. On page 24, you'll look at emergency medical services. And, of course, department heads are here tonight if they have any detailed questions. But under emergency medical services, you'll see 3/4 of the way down, almost at the end, they are up $431,000, roughly 16.2%. If you go to the detail on page 129, the majority of that increase is based on the salary study implementation. So if you see the roll-up on page 129, personnel is up a little less than $150,000. That was based on the salary study. With that, obviously, the benefits go up as well because it's based on the payroll. And then you'll see their operating expenses are actually down about 40,000, and the capital is the other driver of that. That's up. We've got an ambulance replacement and a QRV replacement scheduled for this year. So that's where the 298 is in the capital. So essentially the large drivers are the capital costs of replacing the ambulance and the QRV, and then the implementation of the salary study. But overall, the operating expenses are down. So that's where that is. Any details you'd like to hit on that one?
Well, let me ask one question. Aren't there companies that refurbish ambulances that rebuild them?
There are, and typically what we do is we will redo a box. It depends upon what type of ambulance it is. I know that they are moving to what are the old type ones, which is a truck body, and you simply take the box off and you refurbish the box, put a new box on. You refurbish the box and you do away with the chassis once the chassis goes away. We've historically had issues with chassis because the manufacturers, there's an interesting piece of that, and Carney or Jeff can speak to that. They're actually overloaded when we get them from the manufacturer, so we have a hard time with front ends and a hard time with brakes. And so what we're moving back toward now is the old type ones, where you put a big 350 or 450 chassis underneath a box, and then you've got a heavy duty solid truck that can handle the weight and handle the speed and do the things you need to do. And then at the end of the life of that chassis, we pull the chassis off, refurbish the box, and put it on a new chassis. So any additional, Jeff, you want to speak to about that?
Yeah, one of the reasons why we're going back to the top one ambulance truck is right now the top three is a van type style ambulance. For somebody to do maintenance on this, a lot of time they have to pull the front end or pull the whole engine out of it just to do simple repairs to it. But where the truck style, you don't have to do that. One, you're reducing labor and manpower costs by doing that. They ride better. Biggest thing is right now, we just went and had one of our ambulances weighed. And we are about 2,000 pounds over the recommended gross vehicle weight by the manufacturer on the rear end of the truck, but on the front end of the truck was only 3,000 pounds on an axle. So it's really kind of sitting up, just bouncing along. And it's tearing the front ends about 18,000 miles where we're redoing the front ends on the truck. With this, we're going to a 19,000 pound GVW on the truck. This should alleviate a lot of those problems. It's going to ride better. It's going to be a safer vehicle for them to respond in, and less maintenance costs. But with the 19,000, we are also looking at going to a diesel engine in it. Recommendations are showing 12,000 GV and up requires, for the safe operability, a diesel engine in it.
These things don't have automatic transmissions or manual?
Automatic transmission, sir.
In that capital budget, did you say a truck and a QVR, or just a truck?
A truck and a QRV.
So it's two vehicles?
Yes,
Yes, sir. Our QRV that our supervisor's using is it's over 100,000 miles now. Starting to give us problems, and if we get it now, by the time we get a new QRV in here, it'll be right at 150, 160,000 miles on that vehicle.
Any further questions of Jeff or Carney?
Well, what is there to this rumor coming from the city that they're going to shut their stuff down?
I'm going to defer that back to the county manager. I've not heard the rumor that they're going to shut down. I will say we've taken the direction from where we reported to you at the board, and Manager Alligood has reached out to the city for conversation. I'll let him speak for that conversation.
Yeah, Commissioner, I've not heard that rumor either. I did reach out to the city manager after the board meeting in which the board adopted the recommendations from the EMS Advisory Board on the number of responding units related to some of the issues we were having across the system. I did reach out to him and see, reached out to him again last week. and he said that we would try to get together this week sometime to talk about it. As y'all recall, we are simply asking them, or the EMS Advisory Board is asking them to just not even put back all of what they had in place to begin with, which was 2 units. They were actually only asking them to put a unit and a half, a peak unit, a peak staffing unit. So that would be about a half-time unit. Obviously, they have some concerns about costs, but I have not had that additional follow-up with the county manager, the city manager. I'm still waiting for that meeting, but I have not heard the rumor that they're shutting it all down.
Is that where they would run from, was it 7 to 7? Or
8 to 8. According to our data, the peak time would have to be 8 to 8.
Be glad to give you an update when I know something more, but we're trying to schedule that meeting to get together. I think I had some conversations with Commissioner Langley, who had some conversations with the mayor, and we tried to make some contacts, and so hopefully we'll get there, some resolution on it.
Any more questions? If not, thank you.
So the second item, as you move down, is emergency management. That is the second division underneath the emergency services. You'll see they're actually down $5,000. Their detail is on page 131. They are slightly up on personnel. There was a little bit of change in the salary plan. Obviously, the benefits adjust for that. Their operating costs are essentially flat, about $100 more. They have no capital this year. They replaced something last year, so they are essentially flat, or they're $5,734 less than where they were last year. So, if there's any detail you want on that, we can discuss it. Otherwise, we can move to animal control.
Seeing no questions, you want to move to animal control?
Okay, sure. Under animal control, you'll see that they're up about 17%. It's $62,913. Again, the majority of that, if you'll look at the detail or the roll-up detail on page 133, is related to personnel. And I'll say to you that that is absolutely a good thing in animal control. You see that under the MAP study, there was a significant increase in personnel costs at the animal control, and that was long overdue. And we now have tried to get those folks to the level at which they need to be compensated, and that's probably some of the best money you've ever spent, because those folks have an extremely difficult job, and we were just not paying them the way we should have been paying them based on the market. So with that, it's driven mostly by personnel. The benefits obviously accrue to that as well. Their operating is only up $2,000, and then they do have a capital expenditure of replacing a truck. So all of that increase is driven predominantly by the pay salary, the pay plan implementation, and the capital expense of replacing a truck. Any additional
questions? So the number of bad dogs in the county is going down, right?
Our people are doing their very best with what they have.
Good, good. The budget's going down, Ed, so.
He didn't ask it.
I should have said known bad dogs. All right, Brian?
Thank you. We're moving into forestry service, and as you recall, this is a cooperative agreement that you have with the state of North Carolina, the North Carolina Forestry Service, where we pay an agreement with them where they pay 60% of the cost share and we pay 40% under that cooperative agreement. They are up slightly, about $9,746, or roughly 6%. And that is mostly due to anticipated state salary increases, and they've got a vehicle replacement in their schedule as well. And the way that works every year is they give us their budget, we match up against it at the stated rate of 40%, and if they don't really have a big fire or something that really drives their cost up, we don't spend as much as we anticipate. So we've been fairly successful with that. They do a really good job in keeping their cost low and where they need to be, and they provide a tremendous resource to us, not only from the forestry side, but they provide an exceptional resource to us during hurricane events. They come in and help us in our EOC and for operations. So we are very pleased to have that agreement with them and answer any questions you may have.
I don't see any. Brian?
Okay. The next is other emergency services, and you'll see the detail, the roll-up detail on that on page 137. That includes the Sydney dive team that you have historically funded at $10,000. They do have a service expansion request in the budget this year to seek some additional funding. You have historically provided $3,500 to the volunteer fire safety house, and then about $55,000 for the medical examiner. The county is responsible for paying those costs to the medical examiner in medical examiner cases that come to them, and that, like I say, that those are for suspicious deaths, and that accounts to roughly about 15% of the number of deaths that historically have been in the county. So, any questions related to that?
Question.
Yes, sir.
Each time that there is a challenged death, the 15% you spoke of, do they do an autopsy?
They do. When the medical examiner gets involved, they'll do an autopsy, and sometimes it's done in Greenville, and sometimes it goes to the state medical examiner's office in Raleigh.
And part of that $55,000 goes towards that.
The county is responsible for paying that. Yes.
Okay.
Any other question? Okay, Brian?
Okay, so that essentially wraps up general fund expenditures. The next piece of the budget, which we would review, are the special revenues, and that's on page 139. We hit on these as we went through the initial piece, but want to delve into them a little bit deeper for you because we've got a couple of changes. So I guess I'm just going to hit the highlights of the changes, and that is if you look on page 141, and Carney is still here, that's good. This is where you'll see, as you go down just above halfway, the fire tax district revenues. That is where we collect the taxes related to the fire districts and the EMS districts. Richland Fire Rescue Tax, the Emergency Services Director got a notice from them, and I think we're trying to get that formalized, but he just got that they are looking to actually decrease their tax rate. So that will make some changes in our budget, which will cause that to adjust. So these numbers will not be reflective. They'll actually be a little less. And with that, that's the revenue side. So the expenditure side also goes down. So we'll make those corrections. Do you have any additional?
Just spoke with Chief Bonner again today, and he said we would be getting that detailed request this week for sure. We told him about the post haste on that immediately.
So we will have that on June the 1st.
Yes, I'm hoping to have that letter and request in the manager's hand before Thursday, where Anita can make the appropriate changes in the budget document.
Do you have any other changes, Brian?
The only other change is on the expenditure side on their EMS tax district. Pamlico Beach EMS, as you recall, part of the recommendations from the EMS Oversight Committee were that there were some challenges with Pam Beach EMS being able to respond to calls. We have historically funded them under that tax rate at $35,000, and the recommendation by the advisory board was to do away with that service. Subsequently, there's some additional conversations with their board about a potential opportunity for them to provide a first responder style service where they could help put some hands in place to help with EMS, but not necessarily be the transporting unit. They have made that request through emergency services, and what we were anticipating that would be at a rate of $10,000 for the year, and that would give us the opportunity. We've shown that as funding for them at $10,000. For an opportunity for them to be able to do that, we think it provides a benefit. It's not something we've currently done before, so we want to see how it plays out. We want to see how they're able to respond, but it does help put a hand or two extra on scene
or maybe putting them there ahead of time before our folks get there to try to do some stabilization. So we put that in there, and I want to draw that to your attention because it is a change. And the Emergency Services Director can speak in detail about that if you have some additional questions.
Carney, if I remember correctly, they had purchased a piece of equipment last year, or a lease?
Yes, sir, just gone into a lease agreement, similar to our lease agreement, except on a much smaller scale, but a new cardiac monitor.
But it would help them pay for that.
Yes, and if I might just add, Pamlico Beach Fire and EMS is our last or only department, nonprofit in the county that fire and EMS are the same nonprofit. So essentially, when the recommendation was given and we decided to remove funding for Pamlico Beach EMS, you're also removing some funding from Pamlico Beach Fire Department, the shared utilities, those kind of things. And so in working with them, and they've been extremely good to work with, we've tried to identify what's that real cost, where's it going? And so they've asked for this first year, if we could do a $10,000, they felt like that would hit it, that would give them time to be prepared to cover some of the other costs. And for us on EMS specific, it allows that first responder with a cardiac monitor on those echo calls to have someone there quick, because we're not moving any trucks because they're no longer in service. So it gives us a first responder funded, an EMS first responder funded through EMS, or a department volunteer that can do this. So that's our benefit for this.
John?
Carney, right now we're funding through the general fund, Bath, Washington Township, and Pantego.
So,
is that right?
Yes and no. First of all, there's an EMS tax applied, but it's being supplemented by the general fund. Yes,
okay.
That is correct.
Okay. So the question then is, everybody in the county is funding the general fund.
That's correct.
Right? If you're in Broad Creek EMS, you're paying for Broad Creek EMS yourself. The residents there. There's no additional money coming from the county. Correct?
There's a there's the tax levied for that district,
right,
which comes in, and that's all the operating expense they are getting from us. Now, each department does do something different, may do a letter or some type of support fundraiser on their own.
Yes, right.
But major funding, yes.
Yes. Okay. So the whole population of the county is helping fund those 3 EMS units, right?
Yes, sir, but I would also draw to attention on that in that same budget, when what you're saying, it sounds like just for providing EMS to those 3 districts. But this budget includes system oversight for the entire system. So EMS oversight for the entire system.
Okay. Can we put dollars to just those 3 units? The question is the rest of the population of Beaufort County supporting tax dollar-wise those 3 units when they're also having to pay for their own unit?
I think we can certainly get together. I mean, we would have to figure out it in a division of salary, because salaries are being used for multiple.
Okay. Do you understand what
I do. I hear exactly what you're saying.
The complaint I hear is that those districts that are supplying their own EMS units are also having to help fund the other units, the other 3.
That would be on the general fund side only, but go ahead.
I just wonder, would that also apply to the city of Washington residents? They pay Beaufort County taxes.
I haven't heard from anybody in the city of Washington, but yeah.
Okay.
I assume, yeah.
Okay.
I also think we're missing the boat on the 2 quick response units that we have, one on the south side and one on the north side, that are, in some cases, the first one to arrive, which is part of that subsidy that he's talking about. I mean, I think if you go back to the time we did the study and we got into the EMS business, we knew that was going to be the case. Unless we got to the point that the county was in charge of all of the trucks, which, you know, that was not our purpose. It was to make sure that every area had service.
Right.
So just to speak just a little bit of that, the way the county provides EMS service is that we levy, the Board of Commissioners levy a tax, a special service tax, in those different EMS districts. We contract with agencies who are existing, EMS agencies who are existing, and we provide them that tax funding to help them provide those services. A lot of those agencies do additional things. They may have other fundraisers to do what they need to do. We, in the other areas, the maximum amount you can charge in those districts is 5 cents. We have gone to the maximum on all of those districts, I believe, at 5 cents.
With the exception of?
With the exception of Richland's Aurora, because they are a combined district, and they can actually be higher, but they're actually less than that.
Long Acre is still slightly less.
They are slightly less, you're exactly right.
Broad Creek.
You're exactly right. So the funds from whatever's collected based on that tax rate goes to those agencies, and services provided off of that. So from the county's perspective, we have an obligation to provide service in areas that's not covered by volunteer agencies. And I would happen to say that all agencies now are what you would consider a combination department. All of them are paying staff. They do have volunteers who help supplement, but everybody is paying staff because you have to do that to be able to keep folks and be able to provide the service. So in areas where the county is responsible for providing that, we are using the 5 cent levy to do that. And if the valuation in that area is not such that it can support that service completely, we are using general tax fund dollars to subsidize that. We have to do that. But we also provide EMS oversight, as the director said, for all of the systems, for the entire system. So it's a cost that's spread across everyone. I hear the comment that you've said, and I've heard that before. From my perspective, it is not that tremendous an amount of money. I just don't think it's that much, and I mean, we can delve into it and tell you exactly what it is. But I think it's thrown up sometimes as saying, well, that's not fair. But we have an obligation to provide it, and if we can't provide it, and we can't go above 5 cents, then you guys don't have any opportunity beyond doing that. The only way to essentially solve that entire problem, and I'm going to say something ugly now, is that you do away with all the agencies and you provide it all yourself. And then you have a uniform tax rate across the entire county, and you provide that level of service no matter what, and you use, then everybody's paying for it and everybody gets the same level of service. So the way the system is set up, it does create some of those perceived inequities. So just...
Any other questions? You want to go to your next one, Brian?
Yes, sir. So in this same piece under these special revenues, again, those are the big conversations. We've hit on these before. If there are any additional in there, that's where you have the tax revalue fund, you have the economic development fund where we pay to the city of Washington on the airport grant. That's where you have the 55 for the voting machines. And then the home care community block grant, aging services, and then the healthcare reserve fund, the capital expenditure reserve fund, the EMS special revenue funds, and then the ones that Anita talked about at the last meeting, the special revenue funds for 4-H, cooperative extension, and DSS that were required to be done by the latest GASB. So if there's anything additional in detail, like I say, we hit those high level last time, but if you have any specific details, we'll be glad to hit them.
If not, okay. Are we close to being able to take a break?
If you can give me just 1 second, I think we're there. Any questions on the emergency telephone system detail? That is on page 145. And if I can take you through capital projects, I'll get you into the enterprise funds. And That'd be a good breaking point if you don't
Okay,
mind.
go ahead.
So if you go to page 151, this is the capital projects. This is the 1 cent that's been set aside that the board did a couple years ago and set aside. That's roughly $575 that's shown for expenditures in that, or on the revenue side, and then the expenditures for building improvements. So if you move over to page 152, typically what has happened in the past is we've allocated that funding, and then the county engineers come back and made that presentation at the July-August meeting to say, here are the things we want to do. We're ahead of the curve on that, and these are the recommended projects that came from the county engineer, and that is to expend those funds in this reserve fund this year. The Tideland building is to replace that roof, the outpatient area roof, interior improvements at the sheriff's office, the maintenance shop exterior repairs, replacement of the annex windows, the courthouse annex, and then providing card access at those facilities, admin, maintenance, Seaboard, and the annex building, and then replacing the windows in the county attorney's building, or the building that the county owns that the county attorney resides in, and painting that building. Now there's been some question about that, but that is a facility that we own, and we need to look after it. So, but that's the proposal from the county engineer. I think there's Christine. Yep, she's back there. So, if there are any questions relating to that, that's what she is proposing. Be glad to answer. Or she'll be glad to answer any of those questions.
In the expansion budget, since we're right here, there's a request in there to do the replacement of the floors at DSS. Would that be something we could put in here next year?
Next year is in fiscal year 23
No.
or 22?
Just push it out one more year and then put it under the capital fund request. Do you consider 7 or 10 years on the floor to
The replacement of the DSS flooring is not something that was listed in our, when I prioritized the replacement of the flooring, the DSS replacement of flooring did not place high in my priority list. But they do have issues over there, and so they chose to ask for that as an expansion item.
Okay.
But in the overall grand scheme of the county, it did not rank high enough for me to recommend that to be used as part of the 575.
I got you. Any other questions before we take a break? All right, we'll take a 15-minute break. We're back. And Brian, we're down to the water enterprise.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. It starts on page 153, the Water Enterprise Fund. Again, this year, the recommended budget is a little over $8 million, and that is the continuation of the rate study that was established in 1819 that consolidates the existing rates over a 5-year period to a uniform rate for all customer classes. And in that, there's a 3% rate requested in accordance with that study, so that will go up by 3%. We continue the 10-year capital improvement plan that was established in 1819. You see the expenditures in the amount of $169.88 are recommended in capital. There is some new debt service, as we talked about in the capital improvement plan. There were certain debt packages that were laid out in that, and there is a new debt service in an annual amount of $97,740, which is proposed to finance the installation of the new SCADA system at $850,000, and we've funded some contingency. Now, one of the questions that comes up in the SCADA system is that there may be an opportunity under the American Rescue Act fund to use that to pay for some of those. Sir?
I said that'll be good.
The guidance that's come from Treasury is that they are using the existing programs, the existing state revolving fund program, what is eligible under those things and what's eligible under federal drinking water programs, that if it's eligible under those, then you can use it to do that. So we've still got a lot of work to do in looking at that, but because it is a water project, my anticipation is you could probably look at using some of those funds for that if you wanted to, and that would essentially free up some some funds in the water department. Of course, there was the refunding of water debt. Do you want to talk specifically to any of that?
Yeah, sure will. I'll refer you to page 157. So you can see there in year 2022, the third row from the bottom, our annual debt service next year is at $3,011,925, and that's a decrease of about $169,000 from what it was this year. And then beyond that, our savings go down considerably in 2023 and 2024, and that's because we're anticipating a lot of those state Diener loans to start paying those back. So we have at least, 8 or maybe 8 projects going on right now, it seems like, and that debt service on those will begin in 2023.
And as you'll remember, on those packages that we receive from the state, there's a portion that's grant and a portion that's loan. So, and the loan portion is extremely low. You still got to pay the actually it's 0%.
Yeah, that all the loans will be at 0% interest.
They're all 0% interest. So you still got to pay it back, but there's no interest on them. So those are good. And of course, the entire staff, the entire management staff from the water district is here if you have any questions for them specifically.
Go ahead, John.
Is it next year that the rates will now be all equalized? We got another year to go, is that correct?
Yes, we're in year 4 of 5 years, so in 2023,
Okay.
they'll be uniform.
Questions? Appears to be none.
So if you go to page 159, we'll talk about solid waste, obviously everybody's favorite topic. It is recommended at a little over $4 million. It does include a proposed $5 increase in the yearly solid waste fee from $165 to $170. That is to help pay for the increased tonnage of disposed waste and the new 3-year landfill operations contract. It's just every year we've become a disposable society, and we just throw stuff away left and right. So those costs continue, the tonnage continues to go up for us, and we got to figure out a way. You would think that eventually folks would have cleaned out their garage enough that there's nothing left in the garage, but folks seem to find more stuff. We do in this, just like we do the water department, there's the continuation of an administrative fee that gets paid over to the general fund, and that is for services that are provided by the general fund staff. As you know, an enterprise fund essentially stands on its own, and the fees and revenues that are generated by that enterprise fund are supposed to pay totally for that fund. So services like the finance office, the overhead, those different things that are provided by the general fund staff members get charged back to the solid waste fund and to the water fund, because that's appropriately where it needs to be charged, because they need to be paying it needs to be paying its full ride and not being subsidized by the general fund. As you recall, previously, before we moved the solid waste fund into an enterprise fund where it stood on its own, it resided under the general fund. And there was a tremendous, your costs come one way or the other. And at that time, we were heavily subsidizing the solid waste fund with general fund tax dollars, and you weren't getting a real good picture of what the actual cost was. So, the solid waste annual fee may have been $140, but people were still paying it, and they were paying it out of their general fund dollars, out of their tax dollars. So in changing that and making it an enterprise fund, then it stands wholly on its own, and the fees are more applicable in the way it works. So it's more true to that nature. So there is some funding in here for contingency, and then there is a proposal, some service expansion proposals for both the enterprise funds, and of course
the funding for those expansions would come from those funds. They're not asking for money from outside those funds. So, so of course, the staff is here for those if you have any specific questions.
Just a comment. We need to find a way to better communicate to people if we make changes in the processes or procedures at any of these, at these sites. That's the biggest complaint we seem to get is they don't know that we changed something. And I'm not quite sure how you do that unless you just have all of those site attendants pass out a sheet of paper that tells everybody what the changes are. I don't know.
Yeah, then we just generate a little more trash. I think what we, typically what we've tried to do is we've tried to work with the news media on getting that out. We obviously post it on our website when changes occur. It's any changes related to those enterprise funds are posted on those sites, on those individual web pages as well. We have sent out notices to the Sunshine List regarding it, and then when there are operational changes at those sites, we try to get signage up at the sites, but obviously the gate has to be closed for that signage probably to be seen. So we're certainly happy to take any suggestions about trying to get that word out, but unfortunately what happens is people go and they'll see it's closed or something's changed, and they'll say, well, why is that happening? And they either won't look at the sign and they'll just call. I mean, I'll tell you an example. My dad's a typical example of that. He goes to the Cherry Run site on Tuesday when he's working at the farm, and Tuesday is the day it's closed, and he called me and goes, why is it not closed? Because we made that change. Don't go on Tuesday anymore. So pick another day. But we're trying to, do something. Kristen.
I agree with you, Commissioner Revolts. I do not disagree with you. There have been, we've made changes and things have not changed at solid waste for many, many years. So there is repetition that people are not accustomed to it. And we had signs made originally, and we've had some lessons learned with that. So we are preparing new signs and making new signs and things. But we wanted to exactly figure out how things were going to go to get those done. But we are learning simpler is better, larger is better, and getting the signs up. So we do agree, but there's also some things that we tell this. I think we've all spoken with some of these same people and had these same conversations that the sites are closed on the same day of the week. But we do agree that we are working on that. We put items on the web page, but people are not accustomed to going to the web page. So, but we're trying to get more information out. But again, we don't want to create more waste with more mailings, and we don't want that added expense. So, but we are attempting to do that, and we do agree that we're trying to get better with the communications. And as far as passing out the pamphlets, we actually did that at one site where we had a specific issue at that site, and we printed pamphlets for that specific site and took them to the site attendant, and so that they could hand them out to people to help them become more accustomed. So in certain specific instances, we have done that. So we are trying to improve our communications with people when their changes are occurring.
Yeah, I think having larger print on the sign on the gate, because some of the people that have waited for the attendant to show up on the day that it's closed, it was right on the sign. But he said he couldn't read it from their car, inside their car or truck.
Well, we also, because of that, so we said larger signs, so we went and printed large banners. I mean, the huge I can't remember the length of the banners. How long were the banners? 2 foot by 3 foot banners, so that they would clip on the signs that said site closed, and people still don't know why the site is not open. So we're attempting. So we are trying different ways to communicate the message. However, we've been told that some of those banners have been stolen. So we're
souvenirs like that.
I guess so. We're working to replace those banners and inform them to hang them on the inside of the fence. So again, lessons learned. We're making changes as we go along.
This comment is for Commissioner Richardson. The other day I went to Beach Ridge and I had some questionable stuff in my truck, whether I could deliver it there or not. I was told by the attendant, he said, Mr. Frankie, you know you can't leave that here. So I drove from Beach Ridge all the way to our Republic site. And that was my first time out there, and it turned out to be pretty smooth. I went back, they weighed me, I went back, and I thought the guy was going to take the front end loader, just push the truck and everything back in there, and he said, oh no, you just put it anywhere. Just pull it out and put it anywhere. So I did that. And then went back, and I think the bill was like $10.30. I mean, it was a good experience. It was time consuming, but you know, if we had everybody to do that on the questionable stuff, maybe we could reduce our tonnage. You got anything else, Brian?
Mr. Chairman, we have completed our piece of presentation for you on the recommended budget, the continuation budget relating to general fund and enterprise funds. Our proposal with you is to start on Thursday, where we would look at service expansions, anything new or different or changes to the budget, either proposed by departments or outside agencies. Typically, when it's an outside agency, it's a new agency that's requesting county funding, or it's an existing agency that you currently fund that is asking for additional funding. And those begin on page 161, and they go to 162. There's a general description in that spreadsheet, and those folks will be here Thursday night for short conversations. We've stressed to them to try to keep it short because we know that if you take 15 minutes for every one of these, we'll be here till next week. But that's our plan. Right. So that is our plan to get for that information to be conveyed to you on Thursday, and then we'll be back the next Tuesday at 7, as I heard the board say, for your final wrap up, to where we are hoping that you'll be able to drill down any changes or that you want in the budget, and what would help us tremendously from a staff level in trying to put that and being able to communicate with you as we go through that final process. If you don't mind, if you could send us your recommendations, what it is you're thinking you're going to do, what you're going to recommend. That way we can go ahead, we'll build a spreadsheet, and that way we can put things in and we can say, well, okay, if you do this, you got to find this, you got to do this. It just helps us move a little quicker and give you more information as we go through it. That's just beneficial to us. So if you could, that'd be helpful. If not, we'll work through it as we work through it, but would appreciate that help as we go. So anything that we can provide for y'all that you haven't gotten so far from this side until we get into expansions.
Any questions? Okay.
I would just request that that you come up with that number that's supplementing EMS from the general fund.
We can try to put that together. Yes.
Okay, we're going to reconvene on Thursday, May the 27th at 5 o'clock. Thank you.